Welcome to another episode of Stand on Guard. I'm your host, David Krayden. And when we come back, my special guest, Kyle Kemper, Justin Trudeau is his half brother, not the other way around. So we'll be right back with Kyle Kemper.
So we are in a very precarious position in this country. We need political change, but we also need the resolve to resist.
Yes, please like the station. Please give us a thumbs up. Please subscribe if you haven't already. And if YouTube has unsubscribed you, please resubscribe. So we've been doing a lot of that lately. But by way of introduction, I'm very happy to have Kyle here today. I have been watching a lot of Kyle's work on social media for the past 6 months. And as I said at the beginning, if you don't know who Kyle Kemper is, it's not just that Justin Trudeau is his half brother. He is a real Renaissance man. And you know what? When I was looking up to some of the stuff he's done, he's been very active in financial matters, and he wants the world to be more abundant and prosperous. He's the author of 2 books, The Unified Wallet, Unlocking a Digital Golden Age, and Canadeo, I hope I'm pronouncing that as you wanted to, How We Return Power to the People. And since graduating from university in 2008, Kyle has worked closely with dozens of industry, including cryptocurrency, which I found interesting. You share that interest with conservative leader Pierre Poilievre, who used to advise people to invest in that. Hasn't done that lately, but he certainly has indicated that in the past. I'm wondering, Kyle, just to begin things with a current events thing, were you aware of what happened this week in the House of Commons with the Speaker, Greg Fergus, dismissing the official opposition leader, Pierre Poilievre, the other day? And that was, I guess, Tuesday, when he ordered Poilievre out of the House of Commons because he referred to Prime Minister Trudeau as a wacko and extremist. And a lot of people thought that was very ominous because while Poilievre was calling Trudeau a wacko and extremist, Justin Trudeau was calling Poilievre an extremist who supports white supremacy. And yet there seemed to be a double standard. Do you think this was a very ominous moment in Canadian politics when the leader of the opposition is unceremoniously kicked out of question period because he said something that I don't think the speaker so much objected to, but that the prime minister objected to?
Well, David, thanks for having me on your show, and kudos to you on all the work that you've been doing, highlighting and standing on guard for the people of Canada, because it seems to me like Canadians do not have representation in the House of Commons. And this is a nice example of just the theater that has become our House of Commons, where, like you said, it's kind of hypocritical in that, whatever the words he used, and probably chose a poor word, but whatever, he's trying to get a point across. And, to be expelled from the House are saying that, while at the same time, I mean, the Liberals, I see it in my X feed or Twitter feed all day long. It's like, them basically advertising the fact that, Pierre Poilievre equals Trump equals Alex Jones. And it's just like this really cheap game of like, don't engage on any topics of discussion, just attack and smear them based on other people, or use fear as a tool towards holding on to votes or discouraging others to vote or be engaged. And there's a lot of projection going on. The government projects protecting democracy while undermining democracy, while really affronting to our basic rights, to the Bill of Rights in Canada, or charter rights. And it's been a situation that we've seen play out over and over and over again over these last 4+ years, but especially in the last 4+ years. And it's very reflective of the state of US politics as well. We've got this election down here, and the two parties, it's just fear of the other one is their whole mandate towards, from an election point of view, from a campaigning point of view, is simply be afraid of the other group, their bad news, and there's no actual discussion about any of the topics.
Well, I've written extensively about the uniparty, which certainly exists in the United States, and that's so obvious with foreign policy, with what just happened recently with the $61 billion going to Ukraine. The Republicans were on side with that. Donald Trump was on side with that, for goodness sake. Very, very difficult position he has put himself in because of saying that. But certainly there's a uniparty in the United States. I'm hoping there's not so much a uniparty in Canada, although in terms of supporting that war in Ukraine, giving them
There's
billions
a
of dollars,
uniparty in Canada, David.
there's a uniparty.
There's a uniparty in Canada. It is our whole government system is not of the people, by the people, for the people. These representatives do not represent Canadians. They do not represent their constituents. They do not listen to their constituents. If you look at the actual number of people that voted for the Liberal Party, I think it was, it's around the number of like maybe 20% of eligible voters actually voted for them, and yet they operate with a mandate. The system is broken. And that book that I wrote was called Canada. I think I need to reshape that. Based on the DAO, the decentralized autonomous organization theory.
Okay.
It's an evolution of, let's say, of organizational design, but using blockchain technology towards having stakeholders or shareholders or voters be able to directly vote on proposals. And, it's a foresight kind of book looking at, we have this representative democracy, which was the Westminster system of democracy, of parliament, of government, which was devised in an age when we didn't have electricity, when we didn't have the telegram, when we didn't have internet, when we didn't have Zoom, when we didn't have, this high-speed communications. In the 1800s, it took 92 hours to get from New York to San Francisco. So you needed to have the ability you needed to have representatives to come together to represent, your area. Well, my thesis is the conditions have changed. Now we need to update and upgrade our model of governance, because over time, centralized systems become increasingly secretive and corrupt, and we're dealing with basically peak centralization right now. And I will say that Pierre Poilievre did attend a conference that I held in 2017 in Ottawa called the Blockchain Government Forum, where he showed up and he talked all about Switzerland and how in Switzerland they have direct democracy and the ability for, if you have an issue, as a citizen, you go out and get 100,000 signatures, and then it goes to vote by the whole country. And he suggested that, with blockchain technology, we might be able to have this in Canada. And, if he is true to those words and still believes in that, I categorically will support that, so long as that is the intention, because Canadians need to have a voice on these actual policy issues. Because as it stands now, we go into these hyperbole driven elections where large promises are made, and then they get into power and they pull this nonsense like the Emergencies Act or the War Measures Act, like censoring people's bank accounts, refusing to debate or engage on any topics of substance, instead just playing this highly politicized cat and mouse game.
Well, you mentioned the Emergencies Act. I was going to get to that later, but might as well bring it up now. How did you feel when Justin Trudeau invoked the Emergencies Act? Did you feel like this was an absolute betrayal of democracy? What were your thoughts and feelings at that time?
Yeah, it was like, this was one of their power moves to end the party in Ottawa and the great Canadian trucker movement, whatever we want to call it, Convoy. And also, like, that was at the same time when the whole Ukraine thing started, and it was amazing how they like went from like focusing on this to all of a sudden like everything being about protecting democracy and freedom in Ukraine, and
Hmm.
and doing that. So they really like, they shifted the narrative. And I'll also just say, like, Justin, you know, was the champion spokesperson for it, but Justin didn't invoke anything. Justin's the captain on the ice. Let's look at hockey. Justin is the captain on the ice, and he's got like Chrystia Freeland on her left wing and Jagmeet Singh on his right wing, and they're just playing this. They're just players on the ice, and they are intentionally meant to foment love and hate from others while shielding the coaches, the management, and the ownership structures, which are the ones that actually, are the writing that. Justin did not unilaterally declare, I think we need to shut down people's bank accounts. I think we need to like start censoring the financial system. I feel like this is a larger play. Justin is, for better or worse,
So you
a
think he was
spokesperson.
following the orders of his globalist masters in the World Economic Forum? Because I know you've said that
Yeah, I
previously,
wouldn't
haven't
say the
you?
World Economic Forum. The World Economic Forum is just a conference that happens in Davos where people kind of meet. There's other groups like Bilderberg and the Trilateral Commission and the Council on Foreign
Mm.
Relations. These are the actual like policy think tanks. Bilderberg specifically is where like the heads of all the media and the heads of the industries actually come blueprint and plan, and
Yes.
like devise their long-term plans. But World Economic Forum is just a nice little smokescreen. It's kind of like a Klaus Schwab's or even like a Bill Gates. They kind of just suck up a lot of energy and distract things from the people who are actually writing
Yeah,
the
but if he's
policy.
following orders, that doesn't excuse him of
It
personal
doesn't excuse him.
responsibility.
No,
Yeah.
it doesn't at all. But to make it be like it is all him, like it's just we're giving him a lot of a lot of power and energy. And I think he signed up for the first couple of years of his job, and then once the COVID scenario kind of got enacted, it was like, oh man, like I gotta save this, like shit.
Well, the Freedom
Do
Convoy for me,
this.
I was involved as a journalist from day one. Something told me this was an historic event and I needed to be there. And it wasn't just the people around me saying, I think this is important. I had a real sense of history with this. And it turned out to be a transformative experience for me because I think I shifted my own personal politics from a small C conservative to a small L libertarian. And I realized at that point that we needed to do something about this aggressive, overpowerful state that was always in our lives, always interfering, telling us what to do, to the point of telling us to do something that was harmful to our bodies. And it changed my way of looking at politics. I never saw it the same. I congratulated Polyev at the time for coming out and meeting with the leaders of the Freedom Convoy and definitely indicating he was on their side. Now, I've known Polyev for 20 years. I've known him since before he was a member of parliament. We go back that far. And I still don't know how committed he is to the populist politics that he's espousing at times. I hope and pray that he is, because if he's not, I don't know where this country is going. And in terms of it having equality again for people who really believe in a country where they can have individual liberty. And I think that might be something that's too far gone at this point. I hope not. But the old Reform Party used to talk about referenda, initiative, and recall. You never hear those terms anymore from the Conservative Party of Canada, certainly not from the Liberals or the NDP. Do you see that as part of what you have described here as direct democracy, things like that?
Absolutely. Like we have, there's glaring things that, you know, we talk about democracy. It's like, give us a voice, give us a chance. Like, how can we change something? Because right now, the way that referendums kind of work, I believe you have to get an MP to sponsor it, and there's lots of kind of risk to it. But there's some certain like sacred cows within the Canadian government system that will never get touched. For example, income tax. Like income tax is something that could go to referendum and would be, in my opinion, overwhelmingly passed, and it would help really course correct Canada. Because right now, as you know, an entrepreneur, as an innovator, like you stay as far away from Canada as possible. There's just no desire. Like there's lots of good incubation and good ideas come out of Canada, but they leave because our system doesn't support wealth generation. It
Yeah.
actively pushes you away. So, and it encourages, like, you know, there was like the Panama Papers and all these other like kind of leaks that showcase like a lot of like, you know, big Canadian money is not in Canada. They take that wealth and they push it offshore. Well, you just fix the tax system. That money can stay in Canada and will be spent in Canada and will, like, you know, attract investment, will attract creation. Like honestly, look at the way the little islands do it, like in Antigua or Cayman Islands, or you know, or Switzerland or Luxembourg. Like, you know, look at like their structures, and you know, it's very interesting. The result of that, however, is you impact an industry that really doesn't add any economic value, but it creates a lot of jobs. So, you know, when we talk about just jobs, like, you know, and wow, we've got really good employment numbers because we got people working, but ultimately, if people are working on a job that doesn't actually create any economic value, it's, you may as well just pay them to lift a rock, throw it over a wall, walk around the wall, pick up the rock, throw it back over, do that all day. That could be a job. So, you know, I look at like, you know, something like income tax being something that could be dealt with a referendum. Same with even the carbon tax as well. Same with our, like, you know, ultimate never-ending support of the Ukraine initiative. Like, let's put that to vote on with Canadians. Like, do we want to have a non-interventionist foreign policy, or do we want to be, you know, a bank for geopolitical proxy wars that result in Canadians paying the price in terms of inflation and national debt, and being used as we're the ones who are paying this price, and it's resulting in higher prices on everything we're doing, higher food, higher home prices, lower standards of living, you know. It's just across the board. It's across the board. These poor decisions made at a you know, a national like policy level that, you know, come from this ethos. I think you were touching on it a little bit about, you know, this big government. Like, government knows best. They know how best to spend the money. They know how best to take care of you. They know how best to run a healthcare system. They know best how to run an education system. They know best how to run a transportation system. They know best how to run an economic system. Guess what? That all false, 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 false. Like, they're not good at doing these things. So it's time to have a
Mm.
reflection and a convention or a gathering or a discourse debate about what it is that we want Canada to be. What kind of standards of living do we want in Canada? What are some of the greatest challenges we're facing, and what are the ideal outcomes that we'd like to work towards? You know, because until you actually bring people together and have debate and discourse, you're not going to be able to, you know, unify people away from this, you know, hockey style divisive, like red team versus blue team, but you're all part of the NHL kind of you know, system that we operate in.
You know, that's an excellent way of looking at it. Yes, we're all in the same hockey league, just different jerseys. And at the end of the day, they're all getting together and agreeing. I think we'd have to say that's completely correct. I just found it so perverse, though, when at the same time we're hearing about the war in Ukraine being about a war to save democracy, just like we heard in the First World War. This is the war to end all wars. It's a war for democracy. We're fighting for the most corrupt government in Europe, and I think that's beyond dispute. And we're pouring billions of dollars into this war that is already lost. In fact, former UN weapons inspector Scott Ritter noted the other day that the cash that's already gone to Ukraine in this last installment from Congress has already been gone in the pockets of the oligarchs and the corrupt politicians, and it's left the country. And yet we continue to pour money into a war that's not only lost, but is at this point almost surreal. Because while we're talking about democracy in Ukraine, which doesn't exist, they just canceled their presidential election. We're doing things in Canada that are increasingly authoritarian, and I blame Justin Trudeau for most of this because he is the prime minister. But I always said, Kyle, one of the things I used to write about was the fact democracy is not just fragile, and freedom is not just fragile, and other people have said this over the years. But we always tend to define democracy as elections, and if we have an election every 4 years, that makes us a democracy. But it doesn't, does it? Because we can have an election every 4 years, but we can still be a country that is at the brink of losing our freedom. And I think we're there as a country here in Canada because we might have an election October of 2025. I'm not sure we're going to. I'm not sure there's not going to be an excuse to postpone that election indefinitely. But even if we do, democracy hinges on viable opposition parties. And this week in the House of Commons, the Speaker demonstrated how that's not very viable anymore. We can silence the opposition, but primarily on freedom of speech. And if we lose our freedom of speech, and we are losing it rapidly in Canada, we can't call ourselves a democracy. I'm wondering if you have any thoughts about the Online Harms Act. I have talked about this extensively. It's been ignored by the Conservative Party, largely. Poilievre's mentioned it maybe twice since the bill was introduced. Nobody else is talking about it. The mainstream media has had nothing to say about it in Canada, yet it potentially could shut down free speech for good in Canada if this goes by. And in fact, keep people in house arrest for thought crimes, which when I tell to my American media friends, they think I'm kidding. They think it can't be that bad. This is like a parody, right? You're you're making this up to make Trudeau look bad. I say, no, it's in the bill. Do you have any thoughts about the Online Harms Act in Canada and how dangerous this is potentially going to be?
I mean, this is crazy. This is incredibly dangerous, and and it's a fear tactic towards, it's an intimidation tactic to not, speak freely or not exercise your fundamental free speech rights, or to criticize, the status quo or the government or these decisions. And especially as more and more, the world is more and more kind of transparent. There was a time a couple of years ago when I think it was Chrystia Freeland was asked where like $10 billion in infrastructure spending went. Like, I don't know. Like, we just don't have a ledger to manage it all. It's like, oh my God, like you don't know where $10 billion is spent. There is so much money flowing around within the government that's unaccounted for. It's like how you then if there's secrecy and corruption within this institution, they're going to try and create safeguards to further protect the secrecy and the corruption and the failings and the conflicts of interest. So by creating a, what's it called?
Online Harms Act?
Online Harms Act.
That's what it's called.
then and who's going to be the one enforcing this? This would be like the RCMP, or like a new division, a new enforcement surveillance group will be
a new layer of
created.
government,
A
a
new
new
layer of
layer of
government.
bureaucracy.
Great. That's just what we
Yes.
need. Another one. We should probably add 2 layers of government, just to be extra efficient.
It's going to be called the Digital Safety Committee. It's a new layer of bureaucracy headed by an ombudsperson, which I'm calling the online censorship czar. But that's what this is going to be. And yes, people will be subject to house arrest if your neighbor says, "Hey, I think Krayden down the street might be committing some hate speech in the future."
Yeah.
That's how absurd it
No,
is.
and then and what that
You
does is that, like, it's interesting because I was on a call with some other Canadians, and they were not willing to talk to their neighbors because of the threat of just this. That, like,
yeah,
we've got such a snitch society that, like, people are going to run towards the government to say, like, oh, like, he's thinking about running for office, or he's thinking about, like, running to be mayor, but he's got dangerous policies. So, like, he believes that, we should be able to speak our minds freely, or have open, honest debates, or, be able to proxy delegate our votes based on people who we believe in,
yeah. You
as
mentioned
representatives.
that missing $10 billion that Chrystia Freeland claims she couldn't find. And it reminds me of a conversation I recently had with Neil Oliver, who has become a very good friend throughout the pandemic. And of course, what's happening in Scotland right now is exactly what's happening in Canada. If that's not more proof of this globalist agenda, that this is not coming from individual countries, but is a larger agenda. They're going through the Online Harms Act themselves. They've just passed it in Scotland. But as Neil said to me, taxes these days are not about raising money for anything, because all the governments do is print money. And as you said, they lost 10 billion. They're punitive. They're all
It's
about punishing
domination.
people.
It's domination. It's not even punitive. It's domination. It
Yeah.
is owning and controlling, and, like, being the master to the slave, especially with the Canadian. And it's tax on tax on tax on tax in Canada, to the point where, and coupled with, there's, like, almost a shaming around making money. Like, if you make $150,000 a year, like, in Canada, you're part of, like, some, like, like, wow, you're making almost too much money. But you look at the cost of living in Canada, like, come on, like, people need to be making that just to be surviving almost. And, like, you look at people who are not, or who the I don't know what the median salary in Canada is, but it's a lot lower than that. And, it's basically like, you're working multiple jobs just to stay afloat. We do not have a system that's encouraging prosperity. I saw a report from Tobias Lutke, or maybe it was Harley Finkelstein from Shopify, showing, the growth of industries in Canada. And it's like, public sector growth is, like, off the chart. Private sector growth is, like, medium. And entrepreneurialism, new business creation, is just flatline dead. There's very little new business creation taking place. There are very few entrepreneurs coming to market in Canada, because they want to leave, because it's a terrible energy, and it's a terrible climate. So until we fix, the root causes of this, people are just going to continue to leave. And it's going to get to a point, David, where you're going to leave. You're like, okay, like, yep, I'm going to get thrown in jail for doing this. Like, yep, time for me to leave. Like, I'm out.
Well, that's precisely where I am, Kyle, because there's a dark authoritarian fog
Like, for
descending
having
upon
this
Canada.
discussion, David, like, for
Yeah.
having this discussion,
Yeah.
there's like, a threat of jail. Come on. Like, this is crazy. This is like, this is really dark. And I don't honestly believe that, like, the government maliciously is, like, trying to do this. It's just like this mass formation hypnosis of operating in echo chambers, and, like, being pushed and prodded by this global corporatocracy towards coming out along these lines. Plus, there's lots of money being made, like, you know, all around the table. There's lots of money being made.
Global kleptocracy. That is a term I've heard more often these days than I have in decades previous, but it's so applicable. We're dealing with a bunch of incompetence, the worst people possible governing us and governing us badly. And that's exactly where
Too. And, like, you know, looking at our opposition, like, why won't he talk about this? This is like something very major. Or same with the vaccines, like, you know, leaning into it a little bit, the fake vaccines, like leaning into it and being like, you know, are we like what took place here? How about the spending of it? How about the contracts of it? How about the cases? How about all the friggin' plastic tests that we ordered from China and Korea to, you know, create a culture of fear within Canada? I think there was like $2.5 billion was spent near the end of it on procuring an insane amount of these tests, and these tests, you know, don't work. What they do is they create a an atmosphere of fear, and they have everybody guessing, and they have everybody also viewing themselves as a giant threat and viewing other people as threats. Like, they did a really great
yeah.
job of dividing people up and making people scared and afraid of each other. And it's time to just recognize, like, anybody who's using fear as a tool, like, do not give them your energy.
Well, I got the vaccine twice, and of course I have bio remorse about it. I am trying to detoxify myself now over it. I lost my sister, I believe, because of the vaccine. She got it because she was visiting my mother in a nursing home, and she felt she was keeping her safe. She died of pneumonia 3 months ago without having any history of that, and I believe it was a direct result of the vaccine. I've lost other people in my life as a direct result of this vaccine. I'm grateful I'm still in good health, but it was difficult for me to accept the fact because I spent most of my career in the military, and I found it hard to believe the government was blatantly lying to my face. The government was that mendacious. The government was telling me something that was completely false. That not only was this vaccine potentially unsafe, it was not going to keep me from getting the COVID-19, and it wasn't going to keep me safer from other people, including my mother, who was much, obviously much older. And you wake up one day and you realize, yeah, they've been lying to me. They lied to me about it, and they don't give a damn now. And we're all on our own. And I think that for a lot of people in Canada who were just not necessarily trusting of the government, but they thought the government wasn't going to screw them around that much. They thought the government wasn't going to lie to their face about something life or death wise. And to wake up and realize that yes, indeed, the government did lie to us. I think it's highly volatile, and it's a changing experience. You realize that you cannot trust this government, and you need to do your own research, and you need to rely on your own understanding so many times. So it was a very fundamentally transformative experience for me, going through this pandemic, trying to do the right thing, and realizing I did the wrong thing in because I was told it was going to be helpful to others, and that was once again a I think so many people went through this pandemic and were politically changed forever, and they
Hmm.
could never feel the same way about authority and the government again. And that was certainly the case for me.
Yeah, and
And
I mean, I honestly don't think there was like government was like as a whole nefarious about this. It's just everything was lined up. They were just like set up. Like, they just walked into the trap and then executed like the plan that was laid out for them with Event 201, with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, with John Hopkins University, with New York, like, you know, pandemic scenario where they role played how the global corporatocracy in combination with governments and media, will basically react and deal with a global coronavirus. And so they had the marching orders, and they had like, this is how we're supposed to deal with it. Yeah, that's right. We've planned for this, so we know that this is how we're going to deal with it. And look, there's going to be like, we're going to flood the zone, like the media. We're going to flood the zone with information about this. Like, everybody's going to know, and it's going to be like, it's going to be deadly, and it's going to be fear-stoking. But don't worry, because on the other end of this, there's going to be a vaccine. And it might be rushed to market, and it might be untested, and it might not even work. But that's like the solution that we're going to get towards. And so they all had this plan. And when you're dealing with the global pharmaceutical industry and all these other very large industries, it doesn't really matter nation by nation. The governments are just kind of playing it out. They're working with the largest communication firms in the world towards building and rolling out their strategies. And guess what? They're like, this is our plan. So there's a lot of just groupthink and movement. And then when questioned, when asked, it's like, but is it really this deadly? Or are the tests, are they effective? Is the PCR a good method for identifying whether someone is actually sick? No answering those questions. No, it's, and I've seen this personally with Justin before in talking about topics that he doesn't like. It's just they plug the ears. They don't want to think about it, and so that threatens. That's like the red pill to the blue pill, to use the Matrix analogy. The red pill, they know what's going to happen if they take the red pill. They're going to see through the Matrix, but that's scary. And it's like, well, I've been, an active operator and engaged in the Matrix, and I like my life within the Matrix. So I'm just going to take the blue pill, and I'm just going to continue on this path. And I'm just going to, use these arguments of extremist, right wing, Trump, Alex Jones, Nazi, like all these whatever words that they just throw around to attack and avoid any honest, open discussion about the questions. There's a very high likelihood, David, that you simply got a saline injection. You didn't get anything active. And what proportion of the shots that went out there were just saline? Because in the very beginning, they rolled it out to all the police, all the doctors, all the nurses, all the pilots, the politicians. Like that first batch, those who rushed to get the vaccine, I would posit that it was probably, it would make sense that was largely saline. And coming with the certificate, you're a good boy, you've done. But the longer you get on, as you get into Gen Pop release, as the Walgreens and the what's the one in Canada, the Shoppers Drug Mart, start opening up to get them, then combined with, this supply chain isn't being managed by the government. It's being managed by the pharmaceutical companies, and their suppliers. Like, this is a private deployment of these serums across. So, who knows? But there's definitely an opportunity for a lot of nefarious activity. And this, some posit that this is a full-blown kind of eugenics program as well. And I've called it a genocide. Like, if you want to talk about real genocide, like forcing people to take an experimental medical procedure that you have absolutely zero insight into what's in that, into the safety of it. Yeah, that's dangerous. And when people are dying and becoming disabled, and you're also removing the rights of people for refusing to take what is very clearly a danger to them in the face of, their propagated fear. Sorry, not buying it.
It's a bioweapon, no question. I've heard that expression used by a lot of the doctors who've been fighting this, and I certainly believe that. But this
And a
is a nice
profit weapon
transition.
too.
Yes, I think it's a nice transition into the final topic here, which is your support of Robert F. Kennedy Jr. for president in 2024. I'm a huge fan of Mr. Kennedy. I was his father was one of my historical heroes. I always had a lot of time for his legacy. But I think RFK Jr. to me has demonstrated such courage, and he's demonstrated courage because he's taken a stand on this vaccine that has been completely contrary to everything in the Democratic Party, where he came from, his history, his base. He's alienated his family that are calling him names, that are calling him crazy for believing this. He has put himself in a position where he's standing on principle and ideal. And I think that takes a lot of guts to do that. But I but I would say this to you. I was mentioning this before we went on air. Donald Trump has alienated a lot of his core supporters. First of all, by saying he just loved that vaccine. It was a huge success. And a lot of the people, and don't ask me why they never noticed before, but Trump has never criticized the vaccine. He's always said that he stands behind it. But he made the awful mistake of standing up the other day on his Truth Social and saying it's a wonderful vaccine and I'm proud of it. And his supporters are saying, "What the hell? I didn't ever put that together." And then he says he's going to be supporting Ukraine with billions of dollars, and he's now in political bed with Speaker House Mike Johnson on this. Once again, huge disappointment amongst the Trump base. Now, I think a lot of those folks would would go to Bobby Kennedy because they're saying, here's a guy who does stand on principle. Here's a guy who does not think the vaccine was a wonderful thing for mankind, who recognizes the war in Ukraine is nothing but an exercise for the military industrial complex to continue to make billions, hundreds of billions of dollars off the suffering and misery of others, as they've been doing for 100 years. And Kennedy just seems to have what it takes right now. Trump had 4 years to go after the deep state. He talked a good talk. He did nothing to go after the deep state. I think Kennedy is a man who understands the deep state a heck of a lot better than Donald Trump, given his family ties, given the fact he had an uncle who was president and a father who was a senator, an attorney general, and somebody who understood exactly what was going on behind the scenes. So what about Robert F. Kennedy Jr. appeals to you, and why are you working so hard in his campaign, Kyle?
Oh, I think you just stated a lot of the reasons why, why I believe the courage, integrity, knowledge, uh, uh, selflessness within him. Like, his ego is not like, is a zero compared to Trump's ego of 10, like, on this scale.
Yeah.
And he's so well informed and openly, engages and has engaged with so many people and has a track record of looking deep into things, and also, like, changing with opinion or changing with information. Like, for example, like Bobby himself has gone through, an awakening over, you know like with first like delving into the vaccines and into that, but then with the whole, pandemic and what came out of that, and then standing up and seeing it. Like, before, I think he was, very much into the, like, part of the climate change kind of the crowd, but now
Hmm.
it's like, he's like, no, 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 it's not. You can't simplify climate change down to carbon and, like, make it all about that. It's like, we need, planetary regeneration. We need to take care of our soils. We need to take care of our water. we need to look in our skies and look underneath our feet. Like, he did a podcast with Dane Wigington going over over geoengineering practices. So it's like he's listening, he's aware, of these different things. And that, I think, geoengineering is something that a lot of people are really concerned about, because everybody's eyes sees it. You see a beautiful blue sky day, like down here in Florida, especially a beautiful blue sky day that turns hazy out of nowhere. And it's like, and there's lots more information. But anyways, those are just some of these topics. And what gives me hope around him is he's actually coming with kind of, with ideas and creating a container for healing this divide, as we say, or trying to unify through discussion. The campaign is really interesting in that it has people like from the Bernie side, the Trump side, the Libertarian side, the Green side, like, people who don't identify with sides, like, coming together and working on this, out of this purpose of, this is an alternative to the uniparty. Because everything you just said about Trump, like, his unwillingness to recognize the vaccine may have been the biggest, threat to humanity or civilization potentially ever. And, and to still be proud of that and championing that, and to think and to take for granted as well the mega base. So this is another point of issue. A lot of people voted for Donald Trump in 2016 because they did not want to vote for Hillary Clinton, and he was the underdog and he represented something, fresh. Yes, there is a very hardcore, like, Trump, the best there is, the best there was, the best there ever will be kind of group. But even amongst that group, there's a lot of respect for Bobby. And while you can follow someone for a long time, some of the jokes get a little bit old. It's like that friend from high school who just tells that same joke or does that same shtick over and over and over and over again. It's like, man, like, that was cool 10 years ago, man, or 20 years ago, but we're like, we got bigger fish to fry. You can't just say you're going to fix it. You're the best. You know what to do. You actually have to back it up with a real plan towards doing this. And as well, like, over the course, like, a lot of people that were around him, like, he kind of knifed them in the back and tossed them aside. So it's like, it's kind of a dangerous place to be. And it's already, like, pretty small. And now we've seen that joke. And now, like, with Bobby at the table as the underdog, as someone who's, like, stood up against that vaccine, wrote a book about Fauci and the corruption, and, like, really highlighting how broken it is, talking about our healthcare system, talking about our food system, talking about our, like, a non-interventionist foreign policy. Like, these are real issues, not just getting baited into, like, as the Democrats would love to have it, just like, let's just make this whole thing about freedom, but women's reproductive freedom, like, abortions on demand, which isn't something like, that's just, these are just these little issues that, like, the parties in an election try to make a huge deal out of, as opposed to looking at, the greater issues, looking at addiction, looking at homelessness, looking at how do you solve that, and having policies for solving that. Like, yes, like, one of the things Bobby said is, let's look at, like, marijuana. Let's look at psychedelics. Let's look at, integrating that into the healing, into the the solving for this crisis, and using those tax monies to fund and to facilitate that, along with, just, creating that container for discussing it. And then you get to crypto, and he's like, dude, let's, like, Bitcoin, like, no capital gains taxes on Bitcoin, no trading taxes on Bitcoin. Like, okay, that's, like, those are little things, but they're small, they're big things. And I think, like, as the talent and the information, and as, like, the collective intelligence kind of comes together in support of Bobby, and we use technology, like, some really strong solutions, like, will come to head, like income tax, for example. Like, they just put Roger Ver in jail for, like, failing to pay taxes, or they're trying to arrest him on some nonsense because he made some money long ago, and, like, whatever. It's like, it's just a fool's errand. But we have a punishing, dominating tax system down in the States as well as in Canada. So, I feel like Bobby can, help open the door. Maybe I think a lot of people see in him the hope that these things can happen. And then the last thing that he said, which I think is just absolutely critical and important, is putting all government spending on the blockchain, having a record of it, having an immutable record. Because that's the only way. We need to shine light onto the shadows. That's how we, rid ourselves of the darkness.
Well, when I listen to Bobby Kennedy, I don't hear talking points. And I heard you say this the other day when you were doing an interview. Canadian politics and by large, American politics are defined and characterized by the recitation of talking points. Nobody's worse in this country than Justin Trudeau on this, but even the conservatives do this. They spout lines every day. He's not worth the cost. I mean, it's sloganeering. It's talking points. I listen to Kennedy, and he's talking logically, he's talking coherently, and he's talking freely without reading from a script. And I think there's a political indolence and denseness that defines the Republican Party, especially Donald Trump, in making those statements about the vaccine and Ukraine. But also, I think no more dense move was made by the Democrats lately than putting Joe Biden on the Howard Stern show. This is a guy who was hip 30 years ago, and now is just a profane old man who really has no appeal to the youth the Democratic Party thought he was appealing to. And it gave Joe Biden an opportunity to tell outrageous lies again about these things that he never did in his past life, where he talks about saving lives and going to South Africa and going to jail for and being this great civil rights leader when in fact he was a supporter of segregation in his early years in politics. I mean, but the political denseness out there is so strong where you can say things and just assume people are going to love you for it because that's the way it worked the last time, didn't it? And this is what I find refreshing about Kennedy is that he is actually saying things that he believes in and have not been necessarily run by the communications and is not scripted. And I really think this is going to be an exciting presidential race. And there's so much about 2024 that reminds me of 1968. And I was not around for 1968 as a political observer, but from my knowledge of history, it was a hell of a year. It was a tragic year, obviously for Bobby Kennedy Sr. And certainly that is not what I'm alluding to in terms of the politics that year. But there was a feeling that change was inevitable, that there was hope on the horizon. And of course, the Democratic convention erupted into chaos, which it probably will this year. But
Oh
there was
yeah,
also,
it's going to be
you know,
total chaos.
it,
That one's
and
going to be great. And I'll tell you, the Kennedy has a grassroots movement growing, like Ron Paul style, like Donald Trump 2016 style as well. And there's a lot of people with a lot of talent, a lot of artists, a lot of musicians, and the campaign itself is growing. It's kind of like a startup. It's to do this, but this is where the grassroots kind of come in. People are doing creative stuff. Like we just had a rally in Long Island where one guy showed up, has a whole art car that had Kennedy on the side and had 12 bronze workers on a steel beam on top of it. I look at my bus, there's multiple vehicles that are coming together. Like we're just kind of getting rolling and out there, kind of in or exploring. And then you've got the Republican National Convention and you've got the Democratic National Convention. Like that one's in Chicago, and I see there's already murmurings around it. Couple that with it looks like we've got a summer of love lined up with these protests, with these these NGO orchestrated campus protests that are taking place all over America, which are dominating the news. It's very much like BLM. It's a very big distraction. It feels like this was just all the play from a provocateurism point of view for this year, and I don't see it ending anytime soon. So it's let's be careful about how much energy we give into into this, because it's by design. They want all this energy on it, and it's ultimately extremely divisive. There's no like shared humanity like that's being sought as an outcome here.
Well, I wish you all success, and I think this is going to be a hell of a presidential election. I'll be watching carefully, and I'm excited about what's happening. No matter what the conclusion is, I think we're going through a journey that we need to go through. And I encourage you to keep up fighting and working for bringing the power back to people and away from institutions and parties and these monolithic organizations that control the world. And I think we do need to bring direct democracy back as an option, at least. And we're not even talking about it anymore.
Let's just talk about referendums. Let's just start talking about referendums. Let's figuring out what is it going to take for us to start having some friggin' referendums in Canada towards enabling the people to have voice. Because let's get real clarity on what it's going to take. And guys, get out there. If you want to help make it happen, go out there, start making the motions, figure out like what it's going to take, and like getting that ball rolling, on an issue. Because, and this is something for Pierre too. Do you stand by what you said back in 2017 about the blockchain potentially being used for referendums in Canada to create a Swiss-like system of direct engagement? Because that would be really great if you were like, if you actually champion that. And we looked at that, that would be great. Because I know there's a bunch of MPs out there and representatives as well that are interested in actually representing their people and not just representing the party. So having feedback mechanisms for current representatives to be able to understand where what their representatives want them to vote on, and then actually voting on that as opposed to what your party wants you to vote on, that's a big change. That would kind of mean a lot, because I think you'll find like you'll get a minority, a very small minority of support that actually gets you into the House. But if you engage with everybody, you'll start getting majority decisions, potentially super majority decisions coming from your constituents. So long as the questions and the topics are being framed, and there's honestly open discussion. Because one of the dangers of direct democracy, if it's dangerous democracy combined with thought crime, you just get an echo chamber result where
dead on. Well, Kyle, thank you for your time. Thanks for spending this time with me today. I've really enjoyed meeting you. Maybe it's not in person, but it's been a real pleasure talking.
It's been so great, David. Thank you so much. And to everybody out there, if you want to stay in touch, I'm on Twitter at Kyle Kemper. I've got a Patreon as well. If you want to buy a coffee a month, patreon.com/Kyle Kemper. I got to do some work on that. But seeking to be independent in this world is an issue, right, David?
It is. It is not easy.
Not easy.
Thanks, Kyle, and keep